The abandoned horse's eyes burned with silent suffering that pierced Rebecca's carefully numbed heart, demanding a response she couldn't ignore. She walked away from her six-figure career that very day, trading designer suits for mud-caked boots and emptying her savings account for creatures everyone else had thrown away. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain fell in sheets across the rolling hills of Willow Creek, transforming the dirt roads into rivers of mud and washing away the last traces of summer. Rebecca Matthews stood at the window of her downtown apartment, coffee cup in hand, watching the storm rage against the glass. At 35, she had achieved everything society claimed she should want: a prestigious position at a marketing firm, a sleek apartment in the city, and financial stability that her parents, farmers who had lost everything in the drought of '98, could only have dreamed of. Yet something inside her felt hollow, like an echo in an empty room. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, breaking her trance. It was Diane from the office, probably calling about the Henderson account. Rebecca let it go to voicemail. The Henderson account could wait. Lately, everything about her job felt like it could wait. 3 months ago, she would have answered immediately, even on a Sunday morning. 3 months ago, she hadn't yet visited her aunt's horse farm for the first time in 15 years. 3 months ago, she hadn't yet met Apollo. Rebecca sighed and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Apollo was a retired racehorse her aunt had rescued, a magnificent bay with intelligent eyes that had somehow seen straight through all her carefully constructed walls. When she'd first approached his paddock, he'd been standoffish, keeping his distance with a wariness that spoke of past mistreatment. But by the end of that weekend, he'd been nuzzling her hand and following her along the fence line as if they'd known each other forever. "You two are kindred spirits," her Aunt Martha had said with a knowing smile. "Both of you hiding your wounds behind those proud facades." Rebecca had laughed it off, but the comment had settled in her chest like a stone. Was she that transparent? Or was it just that Martha had always been able to read her better than anyone else? The rain intensified, drumming against the window in an urgent rhythm. Rebecca's phone buzzed again, and this time she picked it up without looking at the caller ID. "Rebecca Matthews," she answered, her voice automatically shifting into its professional cadence. "Becky, it's James, Martha's neighbor." The man's voice was tight with concern, and immediately Rebecca felt her stomach clench. James never called her. "What happened?" she asked, already knowing this wasn't a social call. "It's Martha. She had a fall last night. She's in the hospital now. The doctors say..." His voice cracked slightly. "They say it's a stroke. She's asking for you." The coffee cup slipped from Rebecca's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. The hot liquid splashed across her bare feet, but she barely felt it. "I'll be there as soon as I can," she managed to say before ending the call. 4 hours later, Rebecca's sleek city sedan was bouncing down the muddy back roads of Willow Creek, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. The hospital was a small regional facility, more a medical center than a hospital really, with fluorescent lights that cast a sickly glow over everything. Martha looked smaller than Rebecca remembered, her normally robust frame diminished against the white hospital sheets. Her right side was nearly immobile, and her speech slurred, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Becky," she said, her good hand reaching out. "You came." Rebecca took her aunt's hand, feeling the paper-thin skin and prominent veins. "Of course I came. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been kicked by thunderbolt," Martha replied with a half-smile, referring to the temperamental stallion she'd owned when Rebecca was a child. "But that's not why I called you here." Rebecca listened as Martha explained in halting sentences what the doctors had told her. The stroke had been severe. Recovery would be long, with no guarantees. The farm needed someone to take care of it, and more importantly, the 6 rescue horses currently in Martha's care needed someone to look after them. "I know it's a lot to ask," Martha said, her good eye fixing Rebecca with an intensity that belied her frail condition. "But there's no one else I trust. Those horses, they've all been abandoned or mistreated. If they go to auction..." She didn't need to finish the thought. Rebecca knew what happened to unwanted horses at auction. "What about James? He seems to know the farm pretty well." Martha shook her head slightly. "James has his own place to manage. He can help, but he can't take over. I need someone full-time, someone who understands what these horses mean to me." Rebecca felt the weight of her aunt's request settle over her like a heavy blanket. Taking care of the farm meant leaving her job, her apartment, her entire life in the city. It meant stepping away from 15 years of careful career building. It meant turning her back on the identity she'd constructed for herself after leaving Willow Creek behind. "I can't just abandon my life, Martha," she said softly. "I have responsibilities, a career." "I know, dear," Martha replied, her voice fading as fatigue set in. "I know what I'm asking, but those horses have nowhere else to go, and I thought maybe, after you met Apollo..." Rebecca looked away, her throat tight. "I'll need to think about it. Maybe we can find another solution." Martha nodded slowly, her eyelids growing heavy. "Just promise me you'll visit the farm before you decide. Go see them, then choose." The following morning, Rebecca drove through the gates of Silver Meadow Farm with a sense of trepidation. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a world that seemed cleaner somehow despite the mud. The farmhouse stood as it always had, white clapboard with green shutters and a wraparound porch. Beyond it stretched the paddocks and the old red barn where Martha housed the rescue horses. Apollo was the first to greet her, his large head hanging over the paddock fence as if he'd been waiting for her. Rebecca couldn't help but smile as she approached him, his velvet nose stretching toward her with a soft wicker of recognition. "Hey, boy," she murmured, reaching out to stroke his sleek neck. "Remember me?" As she looked into Apollo's deep brown eyes, she felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. This magnificent creature had once been a champion, his powerful body carrying him to victory after victory. But when he'd broken down during a race, his owners had discarded him, seeing only a damaged investment rather than a living being who needed care. She thought of her own life, the corporate ladder she'd been climbing, the endless meetings and emails, the superficial relationships with colleagues who knew nothing of her inner self. Had she built that life because it was what she truly wanted, or because she was running from the pain of her past, from the memory of her parents losing everything and the shame she'd felt growing up poor in a wealthy town? James appeared from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Thought I might find you out here with him," he said, nodding toward Apollo. "He's been restless since Martha left. Horses sense these things, you know." Rebecca nodded, still stroking Apollo's neck. "What about the others? Are they all okay?" "Come see for yourself," James replied, gesturing toward the barn. Inside, 5 more horses occupied the stalls. James introduced them one by one. Willow, a dapple gray mare rescued from neglect. Shadow, a black gelding with a white star on his forehead who'd been abandoned when his elderly owner died. Daisy, a paint mare with one blue eye who'd been saved from slaughter. Phoenix, a chestnut with burned scars along his flanks from a barn fire. And Luna, a young Appaloosa who'd been found starving in a foreclosed property. Each horse had a story, each had suffered, and each had found sanctuary with Martha. As Rebecca listened to James recount their histories, she felt her resolve weakening. These weren't just animals, they were survivors, just like she had been. They'd endured loss and pain, only to be given a second chance by someone who saw their worth beyond their wounds. "Your aunt is a special kind of person," James said quietly, as they exited the barn. "Not many would dedicate their retirement to saving horses nobody else wants." Rebecca looked out across the peaceful pastures, feeling the weight of the decision before her. "I don't know the first thing about running a farm," she admitted, "or rehabilitating rescue horses." James smiled. "Nobody does at first. Martha didn't either when she started, but she learned, and so can you, if that's what you decide." As Rebecca walked back to her car, Apollo's gaze following her every step, she knew the choice before her wasn't just about horses or her career. It was about who she wanted to be and what truly mattered in the life she had left to live. Back in her hotel room, Rebecca paced the worn carpet, her mind racing. The faces of those horses, especially Apollo's intelligent, searching gaze, haunted her. She'd come to Willow Creek expecting to make arrangements for the farm to be sold and the horses relocated, not to have her entire worldview challenged. Now, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. When had the light in her eyes dimmed? When had the lines around her mouth become so pronounced? Her phone rang. Mark, her boss, no doubt wondering why she'd requested emergency leave without explanation. Rebecca let it go to voicemail again. What could she say? That she was considering throwing away 15 years of career advancement for a dilapidated farm and 6 abandoned horses. It sounded absurd even to her own ears. Yet the thought of returning to her sterile apartment, to the endless cycle of meetings and client dinners, felt equally impossible now. It was as if she'd been sleepwalking through her own life, and Martha's stroke had finally jolted her awake. She scrolled through her phone and pulled up the photos she'd taken at the farm. Apollo's proud profile, Willow's gentle eyes, Shadow cautiously accepting a carrot from her hand. These creatures had endured so much pain, yet they still found the courage to trust again. Could she do the same? Rebecca dialed a number she hadn't called in months. "Michael speaking." Her brother's voice came through, formal as always. "Mike, it's me," she said, suddenly feeling 17 again, calling her big brother for advice. "I need to talk to you about something important." An hour later, she had laid out the whole situation to Michael, expecting him to tell her she was having a midlife crisis, that she needed to be practical, responsible. Instead, after a long pause, he simply asked, "What's stopping you, Becky?" "What do you mean?" "My job, my apartment, my entire life is in the city." "Is it really your life, though?" Michael's voice was gentle but probing. "Because whenever we talk, which isn't often enough anymore, you never seem excited about any of it. You talk about your job like it's something you're enduring, not enjoying." Rebecca was silent, his words striking a chord she'd been trying to ignore. "Remember when we were kids," Michael continued, "and you used to spend every afternoon at the Johnson stables? Mom couldn't drag you away. You'd come home smelling like hay and horses, and you were the happiest kid I knew." "That was a long time ago," Rebecca whispered. But even as she said it, she remembered the joy of those afternoons, the peace she'd found in the simple routine of grooming, feeding, and riding. "Maybe," Michael conceded, "but people don't change as much as they think. The things that made us happy as children often still make us happy as adults. We just forget to listen to that part of ourselves." After hanging up, Rebecca lay on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it made lazy circles above her. Michael's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the memory of Apollo's trusting gaze and Martha's plea. The next morning, she returned to the hospital. Martha was awake, her eyes brightening when Rebecca entered the room. "You look different today," Martha observed, her speech slightly less slurred than the day before. Rebecca pulled a chair close to the bed. "I've been thinking about your offer." "And?" Martha's good hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. Rebecca helped her take a sip before responding. I have questions, a lot of them. How is the farm financed? How much care do the horses need daily? What happens if I can't handle it? Martha's mouth quirked into a half smile. Always the businesswoman. I have a small inheritance from your Uncle John that covers most expenses. The rest comes from the workshops I host, teaching people about natural horsemanship, rehabilitation techniques. As for the daily care, James can show you everything you need to know. He's been helping me for years. And if I fail? If it's too much? Martha's expression softened. Then we figure something else out. But Becky, I don't think you will fail. I've watched you build a career from nothing. This is just a different kind of challenge. Rebecca looked down at her hands, manicured nails now slightly chipped from yesterday's visit to the barn. It would mean leaving everything behind. Or finding something new, Martha countered. Sometimes what we leave behind isn't nearly as important as what we might discover. That afternoon, Rebecca returned to the farm with a notepad full of questions for James. He showed her the daily routine, the feeding schedules, the medications some of the horses required. He taught her how to check for signs of distress or illness, how to apply salve to Phoenix's scarred skin, how to approach Shadow without triggering his fear of men. He was beaten by his previous owner, James explained, as Shadow flinched away from his outstretched hand, but cautiously accepted Rebecca's touch. Trusts women more now. You've got a gentleness about you that they respond to. Rebecca wasn't sure about that. She'd spent so many years building a tough exterior for the corporate world that gentleness felt like a forgotten language. Yet as she stroked Shadow's velvety nose and murmured reassurances to him, something long dormant inside her stirred to life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the paddocks, Rebecca found herself alone with Apollo. He grazed contentedly while she leaned against the fence, watching him. "What do you think I should do?" she asked softly, not expecting an answer but finding comfort in voicing her thoughts. "Am I crazy to even consider this?" Apollo lifted his head, ears pricked forward, and walked toward her with purposeful steps. He stopped just before her, his large brown eyes seeming to look straight into her soul, and gently rested his head against her shoulder. Rebecca froze, overcome by the simple gesture of trust and affection. Tears she hadn't realized she'd been holding back began to flow freely down her cheeks. She wrapped her arms around Apollo's powerful neck, burying her face in his mane, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to really feel. The grief over her parents' early deaths, the loneliness of her self-imposed isolation, the exhaustion from years of proving herself in a cutthroat industry. By the time she pulled away, the decision had crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. She would do this. She would stay. That evening, Rebecca drove back to the city with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her apartment, once her pride and joy, now felt like a museum of someone else's life. All sleek surfaces and expensive furnishings, but lacking any real warmth or personality. She packed a suitcase with essentials, enough to get her through the next few weeks while she sorted out the details of her new life. Before bed, she drafted 2 emails, one to Mark, resigning from her position effective immediately, and one to her real estate agent asking her to begin the process of selling the apartment. She hesitated only briefly before hitting send on both. As she lay in bed that night, instead of the anxiety she had expected, Rebecca felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in her adult life, she was following her heart instead of her head. The path ahead was uncertain, full of challenges she couldn't yet imagine, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that it was the right one. Tomorrow would bring 1,000 details to manage, a life to dismantle and rebuild. But tonight, She allowed herself to dream of morning fog rolling across green pastures, of Apollo's gentle wicker of greeting, of 6 pairs of trusting eyes looking to her for care. And in those dreams, she finally found her way home. The first month at Silver Meadow Farm nearly broke Rebecca. Her city-soft hands blistered and bled from mucking stalls and hauling hay bales. Her back ached constantly from the unaccustomed physical labor. She woke before dawn and collapsed into bed after sunset, too exhausted even to check the emails piling up from confused colleagues and concerned friends. James stopped by daily at first, guiding her through the routines, answering her endless questions, and occasionally stepping in when a task proved too much for her still-developing strength. But as the weeks passed, his visits became less frequent, not out of neglect, but from the growing recognition that Rebecca was finding her footing. "You're a natural," he told her one evening as they watched the horses grazing in the twilight. "Most city folks would have given up by now." Rebecca laughed, brushing hay from her jeans. "I've thought about it. Every morning when my alarm goes off at 5 a.m., I question my sanity." "But you get up anyway," James observed with a knowing smile. "I do," she admitted, "because they're waiting for me." And they were. 6 distinct personalities that Rebecca was coming to know as intimately as old friends. Shadow, still wary of sudden movements, but now whickering softly when he heard her footsteps approaching his stall. Willow, the maternal one who kept watch over the herd with calm authority. Daisy, playful and mischievous, who delighted in stealing Rebecca's hat whenever possible. Phoenix, whose physical scars were healing even as his emotional ones remained, requiring infinite patience and gentleness. Young Luna, eager to please and quick to learn, thriving under consistent care. And Apollo, her steadfast companion, whose quiet strength sustained her through the toughest days. Martha called from the rehabilitation center where she'd been transferred, her speech improving but her right side still largely immobile. She listened with evident pleasure to Rebecca's stories of daily life on the farm, offering advice and encouragement in equal measure. "The vet bills this month were astronomical," Rebecca confessed during one call, guilt creeping into her voice. "Phoenix's skin infection required special treatments and Luna needed dental work." "That's horse ownership for you," Martha replied with a soft chuckle. "Just when you think you've got the budget under control, something always comes up." "The inheritance money won't last forever at this rate," Rebecca worried, mentally calculating how long they could continue before finances became critical. Her own savings were substantial after years of living below her means, but they weren't infinite. "Then we'll find another way," Martha said with the easy confidence of someone who had weathered many such storms. "You remember I mentioned the workshops I used to run? People are always looking to connect with horses, to learn about rehabilitation and natural horsemanship. You've got a gift with them, Becky. You could share that." Rebecca was skeptical. "Who would pay to learn from me? I've only been doing this a month." "You'd be surprised. It's not always about expertise. Sometimes it's about passion, perspective. Your background in marketing could be useful too. Think about it." That night, unable to sleep despite her physical exhaustion, Rebecca pulled out her laptop for the first time in weeks. She researched equine therapy programs, horse rehabilitation workshops, and farm stay experiences. The seeds of an idea began to take root in her mind. The next morning, as she fed the horses their breakfast, Rebecca found herself studying each one with new eyes, seeing not just the animals she'd come to love, but the teachers they could be for others. Apollo, with his dignified bearing and evident intelligence, could help people understand the nuances of equine communication. Phoenix's journey of healing could inspire those dealing with their own traumas. Luna's youthful exuberance could bring joy to children who might never otherwise experience the magic of horses. As autumn painted the countryside in gold and crimson, Rebecca divided her days between caring for the horses and developing her vision for Silver Meadow's future. She built a simple website, reconnected with former marketing contacts who might spread the word, and began the painstaking process of preparing the farm for visitors. One crisp October morning, Rebecca led Apollo from his stall for their now daily ritual, a ride across the property's rolling meadows. In the early weeks, these rides had been tentative affairs, Rebecca still unsure of her abilities and Apollo still testing their partnership. But gradually, they had developed a wordless communication, a give and take that made each outing more fluid than the last. Today, as they crested the hill overlooking the entire property, Rebecca brought Apollo to a halt and surveyed what had become her domain. The barn's fresh red paint stood out against the autumn foliage. The farmhouse, no longer showing its age quite so severely after weeks of weekend repairs, looked welcoming with smoke curling from the chimney. The paddocks held the other horses, each now sleek and healthy, bearing little resemblance to the neglected creatures she'd first met. "We did this," she told Apollo, leaning forward to pat his neck. "You and me and Martha's faith in us." Apollo snorted softly, as if in agreement. Rebecca closed her eyes, feeling the horse's steady breathing beneath her, the crisp air on her face, the warmth of the autumn sun on her back. For a moment, it was impossible to remember why she had ever found fulfillment in fluorescent-lit conference rooms or satisfaction in closing deals that ultimately meant nothing to her. Her reverie was interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Rebecca opened her eyes to see a sleek black SUV making its way up the long driveway, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Curious, she directed Apollo back toward the farmhouse at an easy trot, arriving just as the vehicle parked beside her weathered pickup truck. The contrast between the two vehicles, one gleaming with urban prosperity, the other mud-splattered and practical, struck Rebecca as symbolic of the transformation her own life had undergone. She dismounted, patting Apollo reassuringly as the SUV's door opened. A tall man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, looking decidedly out of place against the rustic backdrop of the farm. As he turned toward her, recognition dawned, sending a jolt of surprise through Rebecca's system. "Daniel," she said, hardly believing her eyes. "What are you doing here?" Daniel Matthews, her ex-fiancé and former colleague, looked her up and down with an expression that mingled shock and something akin to dismay. The Rebecca before him, in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face flushed from the morning ride, bore little resemblance to the polished executive he had known. "Rebecca," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "you're a hard woman to track down these days. You disappeared without a word, left everyone at the firm completely baffled." "I sent an email," she began, but he waved it away. "A 2-line resignation after 15 years? Come on, you know that's not what I mean." His gaze drifted to Apollo, who stood watchfully at Rebecca's side. "So this is what you left everything for? Horses and hay bales?" The dismissive tone in his voice sparked a flare of anger in Rebecca's chest. Before she could respond, Apollo stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Rebecca and the newcomer, his ears flicking back in a subtle warning. Daniel took an instinctive step backward, his urban confidence faltering in the presence of the massive animal. "Yes," Rebecca said, resting a calming hand on Apollo's neck. "This is exactly what I left everything for. The question is, why are you here?" Daniel adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture Rebecca recognized from their years together at the firm. "The partners sent me. They're offering you your job back, with a promotion. Executive Creative Director, corner office, 20% salary increase." He paused, gauging her reaction. "They're desperate, Becca. The Henderson account is floundering without you, and 3 other major clients are threatening to walk." Rebecca led Apollo toward the hitching post by the barn, using the moment to collect her thoughts. The old Rebecca would have jumped at such an offer. Executive creative director had been her goal for years, the position she'd sacrificed weekends and relationships and peace of mind to attain. Now, the title sounded hollow, almost laughable in the face of what she'd discovered here. "You could have called," she said, securing Apollo and removing his saddle with practiced movements. "Saved yourself the trip." Daniel watched her work, his expression a mixture of confusion and fascination, as if observing an exotic species in its natural habitat. "Would you have answered? You've been ignoring calls from everyone at the firm for weeks." He had a point. Rebecca had been avoiding the digital tethers to her old life, finding solace in the tangible reality of the farm. She hefted the saddle onto its rack and turned to face him squarely. "I appreciate the offer, Daniel, but I'm not coming back." The words came easily, without the doubt or guilt she might have expected. "I found something here that matters to me." Daniel's professional demeanor slipped, revealing a flash of the man she'd once thought she loved. "This is insanity, Rebecca. You're throwing away everything you've worked for to play farmer. These horses can't advance your career or secure your future." Apollo nudged Rebecca's shoulder gently, as if sensing her rising irritation. She stroked his neck, drawing strength from his solid presence. "That's where you're wrong," she replied evenly. "These horses have given me more in a few months than that job gave me in 15 years. They've taught me patience, resilience, the value of genuine connection, things no corner office could ever provide." "Very poetic," Daniel said, his tone bordering on condescension. "But poetry doesn't pay the bills. How long before the money runs out? Before you realize that mucking stalls isn't quite as fulfilling as you thought? The firm won't keep this offer open indefinitely." Rebecca felt a flicker of doubt, not about her decision to stay, but about the financial realities Daniel had so pointedly referenced. The inheritance money was indeed finite, and her savings wouldn't last forever. But the alternative, returning to a life that had left her empty and exhausted, was unthinkable. "I'm developing new programs here," she said, leading Daniel toward the farmhouse, where she could at least offer him coffee before sending him on his way. "Equine therapy workshops, rehabilitation seminars. I'm using my marketing background to build something sustainable." Daniel raised an eyebrow, following her up the porch steps. "And you think people will pay to visit this place?" His gaze swept over the weathered farmhouse, the patched roof, the simple furnishings visible through the windows. "They already are," Rebecca replied, opening the door and gesturing him inside. It wasn't entirely true. Her first workshop wasn't scheduled until the following month, but she refused to let him diminish what she was building here. "People connect with authenticity, Daniel, with stories of healing and second chances. That's what Silver Meadow offers." In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove, hyper-aware of Daniel's scrutiny as he took in the rustic surroundings. The farmhouse was nothing like her sleek city apartment, with its granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Here the counters were worn wood, the appliances dated but functional, the decor a mixture of Martha's homey touches and Rebecca's gradually emerging personal style. "You're really serious about this," Daniel said finally, accepting the mug of coffee she offered. It wasn't a question. "I am." Rebecca leaned against the counter, cradling her own mug. "I've never been more certain of anything." A silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of divergent paths and values neither had recognized during their years together. Rebecca realized with a sudden clarity that they had never truly known each other, had been too caught up in the shared pursuit of professional success to explore the deeper currents of their individual dreams and needs. "The partners won't be happy," Daniel said at last, setting down his barely touched coffee. "Nor will the clients." "They'll survive," Rebecca replied. "Everyone is replaceable in that world, a lesson the corporate environment taught me well. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, recognition perhaps of a truth he wasn't ready to acknowledge in his own life. He glanced at his watch, an expensive timepiece that had once impressed Rebecca, but now seemed like an unnecessary tether, counting down the minutes of a life too rigidly scheduled. "I should go. I've got a flight back this afternoon." He straightened, resuming his professional demeanor like a suit of armor. "If you change your mind—" "I won't," Rebecca said gently. "But thank you for coming all this way." She walked him to his car, aware of the horses watching from their paddocks, their presence a silent affirmation of her choice. As Daniel opened his car door, he paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Are you happy here, Becca? Really happy?" The question caught her off guard with its unexpected sincerity. Rebecca looked around, at the autumn-painted hills, the weathered barn that had become her sanctuary, the horses that had healed something broken in her soul. "Yes," she said simply, "I am." Daniel nodded, a flash of something like wistfulness crossing his features before he masked it with a practiced smile. "Then I guess I'll tell the partners to start interviewing replacements." After his car disappeared down the driveway, Rebecca returned to Apollo, who waited patiently by the barn. "That was my old life coming to check on me," she told him, rubbing the white star between his eyes. "Strange to see it from the outside now." Apollo nudged her pocket, where she usually kept apple slices. Rebecca laughed, the tension of Daniel's visit melting away in the face of the horse's simple, honest desire. "Always focused on the important things, aren't you?" As she retrieved an apple from the barrel kept by the barn door, the sound of another vehicle approaching made her turn. Had Daniel forgotten something? But it wasn't the sleek SUV returning. It was James's battered pickup truck, with an unfamiliar horse trailer hitched behind it. James parked and climbed out, his expression grave. "Rebecca, we've got a situation. Animal control called. They've seized a horse from a neglect case about 20 miles from here. They need somewhere for him to go, and the regular rescue shelters are full." Rebecca's heart sank. "How bad?" "Bad," James said grimly. "Owner lost his job, stopped feeding the animals. Dog's already been taken to the shelter, but the horse—" He shook his head. "They say he's one of the worst cases they've seen in years. Might be too far gone to save." Rebecca approached the trailer cautiously. Through the slats, she could make out the shadowy form of a horse, or what had once been a horse. Now it was little more than a skeleton draped in dull, patchy hide, its head hanging low, its eyes vacant. A wave of anger swept through her, followed by profound sadness. How could anyone let this happen to a living creature? The financial concerns Daniel had raised moments ago suddenly seemed trivial in the face of such suffering. "Bring him in," she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "We'll make room." As James carefully backed the trailer toward the barn, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down to see Daniel's name. "The offer stands," his message read. "When you're ready to come back to reality." Rebecca looked from the phone to the emaciated horse being slowly coaxed from the trailer and knew with bone-deep certainty which reality she belonged to now. "We've got a new friend for you to meet," she told Apollo softly, "and he's going to need all the help we can give him." They named the new horse Lazarus, for the biblical figure who rose from the dead. It seemed fitting for a creature hovering so precariously between life and death. The vet who examined him that evening didn't offer much hope. Severe malnutrition, parasites, infected pressure sores, and possible neurological damage from repeated head trauma, Dr. Wilson explained, her face grim as she administered fluids and medications. "If he were anywhere else, I'd recommend euthanasia. But since he's here with you—" She left the sentence unfinished, But Rebecca understood the implicit challenge. Dr. Wilson had seen Martha work miracles with broken horses before. Now she was giving Rebecca the chance to prove she could do the same. "What are his chances?" Rebecca asked, watching the skeletal horse standing motionless in the quarantine stall they'd hastily prepared. Dr. Wilson sighed. "Honestly, 20%, maybe less. The next 48 hours are critical. If he makes it through those, we'll reevaluate. I'll be back tomorrow to check on him." After the vet left, Rebecca pulled a chair into Lazarus's stall and prepared for a night-long vigil. James offered to stay, but she sent him home to his wife and children. This was her responsibility now. "I've got the monitor set up so I can hear the other horses from here," she assured him. "Go home, James. I'll call if anything changes." As darkness fell and the barn grew quiet except for the occasional soft nickering from the other stalls, Rebecca found herself speaking to Lazarus in a low, steady voice, telling him about the farm, about Martha, about her former life in the city that now seemed like a distant dream. "I know what it's like to be empty," she told him, carefully dabbing salve on his pressure sores. "To feel like there's nothing left inside. I wasn't starving like you, but I was hollow in a different way. This place filled me up again. It can do the same for you if you're willing to fight." Lazarus gave no indication that he heard or understood. His dull eyes stared straight ahead, his breathing shallow and labored. Occasionally he would sway on his feet, and Rebecca would spring up, ready to support him if he fell. Horses that went down in his condition rarely got back up. Sometime past midnight, Rebecca dozed off in her chair, only to be jerked awake by a soft thud. Her heart raced as she saw Lazarus had collapsed onto his side, his breathing even more labored than before. "No, no, no," she murmured, rushing to his head. "Don't give up now, boy, please." She called Dr. Wilson in a panic, who instructed her to keep him comfortable but warned that trying to get him up could cause more harm than good. "If he's chosen to go down, Rebecca, it might be his time," the vet said gently. "I can be there in 20 minutes to help him pass peacefully." Rebecca hung up and looked at the fallen horse, tears streaming down her face. "Is that what you want?" she whispered. "To give up? Because I don't accept that. You didn't come this far just to die in a strange barn with only me for company." She knelt beside his head, cradling it in her lap, stroking his dull coat. "Martha wouldn't give up on you, and neither will I. But you have to meet me halfway. You have to want to live." Whether it was the warmth of human contact after so long without, or some spark of will that her words ignited, Lazarus suddenly twitched, his legs making weak paddling motions as if trying to rise. Rebecca quickly positioned herself to help support his head, murmuring encouragement as he struggled. With a tremendous effort that left him trembling from exhaustion, Lazarus managed to get his legs underneath him and heave himself upright. He stood swaying, his sides heaving, but he was up. When Dr. Wilson arrived expecting to perform euthanasia, she found Rebecca supporting the standing horse, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Well, I'll be damned," the vet said softly. "Looks like he's not ready to quit after all." The next few weeks tested Rebecca's endurance and resolve like nothing before. Lazarus required round-the-clock care, special feeds administered in small amounts 6 times daily, medications, wound treatments, and physical support when his strength flagged. She moved a cot into the barn to sleep near him, setting alarms throughout the night for his feedings. Her days became a blur of horse care, punctuated by brief interactions with the outside world, updates to Martha, consultations with Dr. Wilson, hasty meals prepared with one eye on the barn monitors. The upcoming workshop, her first attempt at generating income for the farm, had to be postponed. Her savings dwindled as Lazarus's specialized care added to the already stretched budget. Yet amid the exhaustion and worry, moments of grace emerged. The morning Lazarus nickered softly when she entered his stall. the day he showed interest in the world outside his window. The first time he deliberately moved toward her when she arrived with his feed, a glimmer of recognition in eyes that were gradually losing their vacancy. 6 weeks after his arrival, Rebecca led Lazarus out of the barn for his first short walk in the winter sunshine. His body was still gaunt, his steps unsteady, but the dull coat was beginning to regain some sheen, and he held his head higher with each passing day. The other horses watched curiously from their paddocks as the newcomer took tentative steps across the yard. Apollo, ever the leader, approached the fence line, stretching his neck to catch Lazarus's scent. Rebecca held her breath, uncertain how either horse would react. After a moment of mutual assessment, Apollo gave a soft whicker of what sounded remarkably like welcome. Lazarus's ears, once perpetually flattened in pain or fear, pricked forward with interest. That night, as Rebecca updated the journey log she'd been keeping to document Lazarus's recovery, her phone rang. It was her accountant, calling with news she'd been dreading but expecting. At the current rate of expenditure, her savings would be depleted within 3 months. "You need income, Rebecca," he said bluntly. "The property taxes alone will come due before spring, not to mention the ongoing care costs for 7 horses. "I know," she replied, rubbing her tired eyes. "I'm rescheduling the first workshop for next month. I've got 5 participants confirmed already." "That's a start, but it won't be enough. You might need to consider selling the farm, or at least some of the horses." The suggestion hit Rebecca like a physical blow. "That's not an option," she said firmly. "I'll find another way." After hanging up, she sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by veterinary bills, feed invoices, and repair estimates for the barn roof that had begun leaking during the last heavy rain. The financial reality was stark and unforgiving. The dream she'd embraced so wholeheartedly was in danger of collapsing under the weight of practical concerns. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was James, his expression unusually serious. "Got a minute?" he asked. "There's something I think you should know." Rebecca invited him in, offering coffee, which he declined with a shake of his head. "I just heard from a friend who works at Rosemont Equestrian Center," he said, settling into a chair across from her. "Apparently, Gabriel Montgomery was asking about you and the farm." Rebecca frowned, the name vaguely familiar. "Montgomery? Isn't he the real estate developer who's been buying up farmland in the county?" James nodded grimly. "The very same. He's built 3 luxury subdivisions in the last 5 years, all on former agricultural land. Word is, he's looking to expand again, and your property sits right where he wants to build his next project." "But the farm isn't for sale," Rebecca said, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. "Doesn't matter to men like Montgomery," James replied. "He has ways of getting what he wants, and from what I hear, he's very interested in Silver Meadow Farm." Gabriel Montgomery arrived at Silver Meadow Farm 3 days later, his black Bentley looking even more out of place on the gravel driveway than Daniel's SUV had. Rebecca watched from the barn doorway as he emerged. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a camel hair coat that probably cost more than a month's worth of horse feed. He surveyed the property with the calculated gaze of a man accustomed to assessing value in terms of potential profit. Rebecca stepped out to meet him, deliberately not hurrying, taking time to pat Lazarus, who was now well enough to occupy a stall near the entrance. She'd chosen her outfit with care that morning after James had called to warn her of Montgomery's impending visit, worn jeans and boots that had seen better days, but a crisp button-down shirt and her good wool jacket. Farm practical, but not desperate looking. Never show weakness to predators, Martha had taught her. "Ms. Matthews," Montgomery called, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of a career salesman. "Gabriel Montgomery. I hope I'm not interrupting your day." "Mr. Montgomery," Rebecca acknowledged, extending a hand roughened by farm work. "What brings you to Silver Meadow?" His handshake was firm but brief, as if he was reluctant to maintain contact with her calloused palm. "I have a proposition that could solve all your problems," he said, coming straight to the point. "I'd like to buy your land." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "My land isn't for sale." Montgomery smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. "Everything has a price, Ms. Matthews. I'm prepared to offer you $1 million for this property. Well above market value, I might add." The figure momentarily stole Rebecca's breath. $1 million would not only clear her mounting debts but would provide enough to purchase a smaller property elsewhere and still have a cushion for the horse's care. For a fleeting moment, the offer tempted her. "That's generous," she said carefully, "but as I said, Silver Meadow isn't for sale." Montgomery's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more comfortable? It's rather cold out here." Rebecca led him to the farmhouse, hyper-aware of his assessing gaze, taking in everything: the aging infrastructure, the patches on the barn roof, the weathered fencing that needed replacement in several sections. In the kitchen, she offered coffee, which he accepted with a nod. "Ms. Matthews, I've done my research," Montgomery said once they were seated at the kitchen table. "Your aunt's medical bills are substantial. This property requires significant investment to remain operational, and you've recently acquired another rescue horse requiring expensive care." He leaned forward. "The financial mathematics simply don't add up. How long before you're forced to sell anyway, likely for much less than I'm offering today?" Rebecca's spine stiffened. How did he know about Lazarus? About Martha's medical expenses? The invasion of privacy disturbed her almost as much as the accuracy of his assessment. "Mr. Montgomery, I appreciate your concern for my financial welfare," she said, not bothering to mask the irony in her tone. "But Silver Meadow is more than just an investment to me. It's a home for myself and for 7 horses who have nowhere else to go." Montgomery's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I understand your attachment truly. My daughter rides competitively. I know how special the bond with horses can be." He paused. "Which is why my offer includes a provision to rehome your rescues at Rosemont Stables. They'd receive excellent care." The offer was shrewder than Rebecca had expected, addressing what Montgomery correctly identified as her primary concern. But she knew Rosemont's reputation, a high-end facility that valued performance and pedigree. What would happen to horses like Phoenix with his scarred body, or Lazarus who might never fully recover his strength? How long before they were deemed unworthy of expensive stall space? "These horses need specialized care and understanding," she said. "They've all experienced trauma. They need stability, not another upheaval." Montgomery sighed, setting down his coffee cup with a decisive click. "Ms. Matthews, let me be frank. This property is uniquely positioned for my next development project. The views, the proximity to town while maintaining a rural feel, it's exactly what my clients are looking for. I will have this land." The veneer of geniality had fallen away, revealing the steely businessman beneath. Rebecca met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Not from me, you won't." Montgomery stood, buttoning his coat with deliberate movements. "I admire your spirit, but stubbornness won't pay your bills. When you're ready to be realistic, my offer stands. For now, it won't improve with time." After he left, Rebecca sank into a chair, the brave front she'd maintained crumbling in the face of her private fears. Montgomery was right about one thing. The financial situation was becoming untenable. The $1 million offer haunted her, whispering of an easy solution to her mounting problems. She was still sitting there when James arrived for the afternoon feeding, his weathered face creasing with concern when he saw her expression. "Montgomery came," she said simply. James nodded. Figured as much when I saw the fancy car heading down the road. What's his offer? When she told him, James let out a low whistle. That's well over market value. I know. Rebecca rubbed her temples where a headache was forming. He also knows exactly how much trouble I'm in financially. Has contacts at Martha's Rehabilitation Center, apparently. Probably has someone at the bank feeding him information too. Men like that have eyes and ears everywhere, James agreed grimly. You turned him down? Of course I did, but he made it clear he won't give up easily. James's expression darkened. He won't. Montgomery doesn't take rejection well. Be prepared for things to get unpleasant. Rebecca didn't have to wait long to discover what unpleasant meant. The following week brought a letter from the county zoning board citing Silver Meadow for numerous code violations that would require expensive remediation. Then came notification that the property's water rights were being contested by a neighboring landowner, a man Rebecca later learned was Montgomery's golf partner. The final blow was a call from Martha's care facility, apologetically informing her that her aunt's insurance coverage was being reviewed and might not cover the next phase of rehabilitation. Each morning brought new challenges, new expenses, new reasons to reconsider Montgomery's offer. Yet each evening, as Rebecca made her rounds through the barn, checking on each horse before retiring, she found renewed determination in their steady gazes and quiet trust. Lazarus especially became her touchstone. His recovery, while slow, was a daily reminder of resilience against impossible odds. When she felt overwhelmed, she would sit in his stall, drawing strength from his quiet presence. We're not giving up, she told him one evening, after a particularly difficult day that had included a heated exchange with the zoning board and another thinly veiled message from Montgomery via his attorney. This is your home now, and I'm going to make sure it stays that way. The next morning, Rebecca woke with newfound clarity. If Montgomery could leverage his connections to pressure her, perhaps she could find her own network of support. She called Michael, outlining the situation and asking for legal advice. Then she reached out to former clients who owned small businesses, seeking guidance on rural entrepreneurship and sustainable funding models. By week's end, she had assembled a makeshift advisory team and developed a three-pronged strategy: fight the legal battles through proper channels, accelerate the workshop program to generate immediate income, and launch a community campaign to raise awareness about Silver Meadow's mission. The first workshop, hastily rescheduled and expanded, brought 8 participants to the farm, each paying a modest fee to learn about equine rehabilitation while helping with the horse's care. Among them was a local journalist who, moved by Lazarus's story and impressed by Rebecca's dedication, offered to write a feature for the regional newspaper. People need to know what's happening here, she told Rebecca as they groomed Phoenix together. Not just the threat from Montgomery, but the work you're doing with these horses. It matters. For the first time in weeks, Rebecca felt a spark of hope. Perhaps Silver Meadow could be saved after all, not through a miracle windfall, but through the combined efforts of people who recognized its value beyond mere acreage and development potential. That evening, as she updated Martha on the day's events during their nightly call, her aunt listened with evident pride. "You're finding your way, Becky," Martha said, her speech now almost back to normal, though her right arm remained largely immobile. "Building something even stronger than what I had there." "I learned from the best," Rebecca replied with a smile. "The doctors say you might be able to come home next month for a visit. The horses miss you, especially Apollo." "I miss them too," Martha said softly, "but I'm not worried about them anymore. They have you now." The newspaper article about Silver Meadow Farm hit the Sunday edition with unexpected impact. The journalist, Elena Cortez, had crafted a compelling narrative that contrasted Rebecca's mission to rehabilitate abandoned horses with Montgomery's aggressive development plans. Lazarus's dramatic rescue and recovery featured prominently, with before and after photographs that spoke more eloquently than words ever could about the value of second chances. By Monday morning, Rebecca's email inbox and voicemail were overflowing. Local residents expressed support and offered assistance, everything from donated hay to carpentry skills for barn repairs. Several more people signed up for upcoming workshops. A nearby feed store offered a substantial discount on supplies in exchange for advertising space on the farm's website. Most surprising was a message from the county's Historical Preservation Society suggesting that the original section of Silver Meadows barn, built in the 1880s, might qualify for protected status, which would complicate any potential development plans. "It's a start," Rebecca told James as they reviewed the responses together. "But Montgomery won't be deterred by a little positive publicity and community goodwill." James nodded grimly. "You can count on that. Men like him play the long game. He'll just change tactics, find another pressure point." As if summoned by their conversation, Montgomery's Bentley appeared on the horizon, sending a ripple of tension through Rebecca's body. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A younger man accompanied him, tall and athletic, with the same silver-streaked dark hair and confident bearing. "His son," James murmured, "Alexander Montgomery, runs the architectural side of the business. If Gabriel's the shark, Alexander's the barracuda, equally dangerous but more subtle." Rebecca squared her shoulders. "Well, let's see what the Montgomerys want today." As the two men approached, Rebecca noticed that while Gabriel wore his usual impeccable business attire, Alexander was dressed more casually in expensive-looking jeans and a tailored sport coat. His eyes, unlike his father's calculating gaze, moved over the property with what appeared to be genuine interest in its features, rather than just its market value. "Ms. Matthews," Gabriel greeted her with brittle politeness, "I see you've been busy rallying the locals to your cause. Quite the emotional appeal in yesterday's paper." "Mr. Montgomery?" Rebecca replied evenly. "I didn't write the article. I simply shared our story." "Indeed." He gestured to the younger man beside him. "My son Alexander. He specializes in adaptive reuse projects. I thought perhaps a different perspective might help us find common ground." Alexander stepped forward, offering a hand. His grip was firm but not domineering, his smile reaching his eyes in a way his father's never did. "Ms. Matthews, I've been following your work with the rescue horses. Impressive results, especially with Lazarus." The genuine compliment caught Rebecca off guard. "Thank you. He's a fighter." "May I see him?" Alexander asked. "And the others? I'd like to understand what you've built here before we discuss anything else." Rebecca exchanged a glance with James, who gave a barely perceptible shrug. "I suppose that's reasonable," she conceded. "This way." As they walked toward the barn, Gabriel's phone rang. After checking the screen, he excused himself to take the call, leaving Rebecca alone with Alexander. "That was deliberate," Alexander said with a rueful smile once his father was out of earshot. "He always schedules an urgent call about 20 minutes into these meetings, gives me space to work without his hovering." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Work on what exactly? Convincing me to sell through a softer approach?" "Partly," Alexander admitted with surprising candor, "but also to actually see what's here. My father tends to view properties as blank slates for his vision. I prefer to understand their existing value before making recommendations." Inside the barn, Rebecca introduced Alexander to each horse, explaining their backgrounds and rehabilitation progress. Unlike his father, who had barely glanced at the animals during his visit, Alexander took time with each one, asking thoughtful questions and observing their behaviors with evident knowledge. "You've ridden?" Rebecca asked as he correctly noted signs of Phoenix's past mistreatment just from the horse's body language. "Since childhood," Alexander confirmed. "Competed through college. Had to give it up when I joined the firm. No time anymore. But I miss it. He reached out slowly, allowing Apollo to sniff his hand before gently stroking the horse's neck. He's magnificent. Thoroughbred? Yes. Former racehorse. Broke down during a race and was going to be euthanized until my aunt intervened. Alexander nodded, a shadow crossing his features. I've seen how the industry discards them when they're no longer profitable. It's unconscionable. They reached Lazarus's stall last. The horse's transformation was ongoing. His body still too thin, patches of his coat still dull, but the difference from his arrival was remarkable. He regarded Alexander with cautious interest, no longer showing the vacant fear that had once dominated his expression. The article didn't exaggerate, Alexander said quietly. You've performed a miracle with him. Not me alone, Rebecca corrected. It takes a community to save a horse like Lazarus. James, Dr. Wilson, the volunteers who've started helping out, we all played a part. Alexander turned to face her directly. And that's what my father doesn't understand about this place. He sees acres and development potential. You see a sanctuary that's greater than the sum of its parts. For a moment, Rebecca allowed herself to hope that she'd found an ally in an unexpected place. But Alexander's next words deflated that nascent optimism. Which makes what I have to propose difficult, he continued. My father will never stop pursuing this property, Ms. Matthews. It's the keystone for his legacy project, a development he's been planning for years. But I think there might be a compromise that serves both purposes. Rebecca crossed her arms. I'm listening, but I can't imagine what compromise preserves a horse sanctuary and allows your father to build luxury homes. Not homes, Alexander corrected. At least not entirely. What if instead of bulldozing Silver Meadow, we incorporated it into the development as its centerpiece? An equestrian community built around a working rescue facility. The historical barn preserved, the pastures maintained, but with residential properties surrounding it, whose homeowners association fees help fund the rescue operations. The proposal was unexpected enough to give Rebecca pause. You're suggesting the development would actually support the sanctuary? Exactly. High-end properties marketed to horse lovers who want the country lifestyle without the full responsibility of maintaining a farm. They get access to riding facilities and the satisfaction of supporting rehabilitation work. You get sustainable funding and can expand your rescue operations. My father gets his development, just in a modified form. It was clever. Rebecca had to admit that. A solution that seemingly addressed everyone's needs while requiring significant compromise from all sides. But something about it still felt wrong, a subtle unease she couldn't immediately identify. What happens to the horses during construction, she asked, and who would control the sanctuary operations afterward? Who makes decisions about which horses to rescue, what treatments to pursue? Alexander spread his hands. Details to be negotiated, but I envision you continuing as director with appropriate funding and resources. Before Rebecca could respond, Gabriel rejoined them, his expression souring when he saw his son and Rebecca deep in conversation near Lazarus's stall. I see Alexander has been sharing our alternative proposal, he said, his tone suggesting the idea didn't have his full endorsement. A compromise that allows everyone to win. I'm not sure anyone wins with compromise, Rebecca replied carefully. But I appreciate the creative thinking. I'll need time to consider it, and to discuss it with Martha. This is still legally her farm. Gabriel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, but do consider it promptly. The County Planning Commission meets next month to review our rezoning request for the surrounding properties. It would strengthen our position to include Silver Meadow in the presentation. After the Montgomerys departed, Rebecca leaned against Lazarus's stall door, her mind churning with conflicting thoughts. The compromise plan was more than she'd expected, a potential path forward that preserved the sanctuary's mission while resolving the financial crisis. Yet something about it felt like defeat, like accepting the inevitable encroachment of development against which Martha had fought for decades. "What do you think?" she asked Lazarus, who nudged her hand gently. "Is half a sanctuary better than none at all?" Martha's face on the video call was a study in conflicting emotions as Rebecca outlined Alexander Montgomery's proposal. The older woman's physical recovery had progressed remarkably, her speech now clear, her left side fully functional, but her expression betrayed deep concern. "It sounds reasonable on the surface," Martha said carefully, "almost too reasonable." Rebecca nodded, relieved that her aunt shared her instinctive wariness. "That's what I thought. It solves the financial problems, preserves the sanctuary's function, and even allows for expansion of the rescue program. But it puts control in their hands ultimately," Martha finished. "No matter what assurances they give now about your autonomy as director, once that land becomes part of their development, the power dynamic shifts forever." The two women sat in silence for a moment, separated by miles, but united in their protective instinct towards Silver Meadow and its equine residents. "What does your heart tell you, Becky?" Martha finally asked. Rebecca gazed out the window at the horses grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. Apollo stood watchfully at the edge of the paddock, his posture alert as always. Lazarus, now strong enough for limited outdoor time, stayed close to the older horse as if drawing confidence from his calm presence. "My heart says no," Rebecca admitted, "but my head says we might not have a choice if we want to keep the sanctuary operating. The financial reality is getting grimmer by the day." Martha's expression softened. "When I asked you to take over the farm, I never intended to saddle you with such an impossible burden. I'd understand if you decided to accept their offer, or even to sell outright and start fresh somewhere else with the horses." The permission to surrender, given with such genuine understanding, ironically strengthened Rebecca's resolve to keep fighting. "Let me try something first," she said, "before we make any decisions." The next morning, Rebecca called an emergency meeting of what she'd come to think of as her advisory council: James, Elena the journalist, Dr. Wilson, and Michael, who joined via video from the city. She outlined the Montgomery's proposal and the concerns it raised. "The fundamental problem is financial sustainability," she concluded. "If we could solve that, we'd have the freedom to refuse their offer outright." Elena was the first to speak. "The article generated a lot of community support, but goodwill doesn't pay bills. What about a more formal fundraising campaign? A non-profit structure would allow for tax-deductible donations." Michael nodded. "I've been researching that option. The paperwork isn't simple, but it's doable. The bigger question is whether ongoing donations would be sufficient and reliable enough to sustain operations." "What about diversifying beyond workshops?" Dr. Wilson suggested. "I have several clients who would pay well for therapeutic riding programs for their special needs children. The medical community increasingly recognizes the benefits of equine therapy." James, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "There's another option we haven't considered. My nephew works for Horizon Films. They're scouting locations for a family movie about, get this, a horse rescue. They need a real working farm with actual rescue horses, authentic but photogenic. The location fee would cover Silver Meadow's expenses for at least a year." Rebecca's heart leapt at the possibility, but caution quickly tempered her excitement. Would it disrupt the horses' routines? Some of them are still fragile, especially Lazarus. "That's why it's perfect," James explained. "They want reality, including the day-to-day rehabilitation work. They'd work around your schedule, not the other way around." For the first time in months, Rebecca felt a genuine surge of hope. Not just a stopgap measure, but a potential pathway to establishing Silver Meadows' independence for the crucial year ahead. Time enough to implement the nonprofit structure, develop the therapeutic riding program, and build a sustainable model that wouldn't require constant financial triage. "Make the introduction," she told James, "but no promises until we hear the details." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. James's nephew arranged for the film's location scout and producer to visit the farm. Elena's article spawned 2 follow-up pieces in larger regional papers, bringing Silver Meadows' story to an even wider audience. Dr. Wilson introduced Rebecca to parents of special needs children who were enthusiastic about the possibility of equine therapy programs. Meanwhile, the horses continued their daily routines, oblivious to the human machinations that would determine their future. Lazarus gained strength steadily, now able to spend several hours daily in the small paddock adjoining the barn. The others thrived under the increasing attention from volunteers who had been moved by their stories. Rebecca was mucking out stalls one morning, lost in thought about the pending film proposal, when she heard the distinctive purr of an expensive engine on the driveway. Her heart sank, expecting to see Gabriel Montgomery's Bentley, perhaps coming to press for an answer to his compromise offer. Instead, a sleek red sports car pulled up, and Alexander Montgomery emerged, dressed casually in riding clothes. Rebecca set down her pitchfork and walked out to meet him, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Mr. Montgomery," she greeted him neutrally. "This is unexpected." Alexander looked almost sheepish. "Alexander, please. And yes, I know I should have called first. This isn't an official visit. My father doesn't know I'm here." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" "To ride, if you'll let me." He gestured to the riding boots and helmet he'd retrieved from his car. "And to talk away from my father's influence. I have information you should know before you make any decision about our proposal." Curiosity overcame caution. "I suppose we could saddle up Apollo and Willow. They could use the exercise." As they rode side by side across the rolling pastures of Silver Meadow, Alexander was quiet at first, seemingly absorbed in the simple pleasure of being on horseback again. Apollo moved with fluid grace beneath Rebecca, while Willow carried Alexander with the steady reliability that made her perfect for less experienced riders. "This land is even more beautiful from horseback," Alexander finally said, as they reached the crest of a hill overlooking the entire property. "I can see why you're fighting so hard to preserve it." Rebecca patted Apollo's neck. "It's not just the land. It's what happens here. The healing, the second chances." Alexander nodded, his expression troubled. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. The compromise plan I presented, it's not what it appears to be." A cold feeling settled in Rebecca's stomach. "What do you mean?" "The equestrian community concept, it sounds ideal on paper, but I've seen the actual development plans my father has prepared for investors. The sanctuary portion shrinks with each iteration, eventually becoming little more than a decorative amenity. The horses would be window dressing, not the focus." Rebecca reined Apollo to a stop. "Why are you telling me this? You're undermining your own family's business." Alexander met her gaze directly. "Because unlike my father, I believe there's room in this world for places like Silver Meadow, genuine sanctuaries uncorrupted by commercial interests. And because," he hesitated, "I admire what you've built here. The dedication, the purpose. It's real in a way that most things in my world aren't." For a moment, Rebecca was speechless, thrown off balance by his unexpected honesty. "What happens when your father discovers you've warned me?" she finally asked. Alexander's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. "Let's just say it won't be the first time I've disappointed Gabriel Montgomery. I'm his son, not his clone, despite his best efforts. They rode in thoughtful silence back toward the barn, the implications of Alexander's revelation settling over Rebecca like a heavy mantle. The compromise had been an illusion, a Trojan horse designed to gain a foothold on the property before gradually transforming it into exactly what she feared most. "Thank you for your honesty," she said as they dismounted. "It can't have been an easy decision." Alexander shook his head. "Easier than you might think. I've been watching my father manipulate people and reshape landscapes to his will my entire life. This time I couldn't stand by silently." As he prepared to leave, Alexander turned back with one last observation. "You know, for what it's worth, I think you're going to win this one. My father underestimates the power of what you've created here, the community, the purpose. He sees land and obstacles. He doesn't see the story." After Alexander's departure, Rebecca returned to Lazarus's stall, her mind churning with this new information. The gelding greeted her with a gentle nickering, pushing his nose against her shoulder in a gesture that had become his way of expressing affection. "Well, boy," she murmured, stroking his now gleaming neck. "It seems we're back to Plan A, finding our own path forward, whatever it takes." The Horizon Films team arrived at Silver Meadow on a crisp spring morning, bringing with them an energy that transformed the quiet farm into a hive of activity. The producer, Natalie Chen, was a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for authentic storytelling and a genuine love of animals. She took one look at Lazarus and declared him the heart of the movie, much to Rebecca's mingled pride and concern. "His recovery is still ongoing," Rebecca cautioned. "We need to be careful about how much we ask of him." Natalie nodded, understanding. "We'll work around his needs, not the other way around. This film is about real rescue horses and their journeys, the good, the bad, and the messy middle. We wouldn't dream of compromising his health for a shot." Over the next few days, the film crew integrated themselves into farm life with surprising ease. They documented the daily routines, feeding, grooming, rehabilitation exercises, capturing the authentic rhythm of the sanctuary. The horses, after initial wariness, accepted the cameras and equipment as just another part of their expanding world. Rebecca found herself increasingly comfortable with the arrangement, especially when she saw how respectfully the crew treated the animals and their spaces. The location fee had already been paid, enough to cover 6 months of operating expenses, with the promise of more if they needed to extend filming. "We couldn't have created a more perfect setting if we'd built it from scratch," Natalie told her one evening as they watched the horses in the paddock. "The authenticity of this place, the genuine care, it's exactly what this story needs." But the respite was short-lived. 1 week into filming, Gabriel Montgomery's Bentley appeared on the horizon once more. This time he wasn't alone. A woman in a suit carrying a briefcase accompanied him, along with 2 men Rebecca didn't recognize. James materialized at her side, his expression grim. "That's Montgomery's attorney with him. And I'd bet my truck those other 2 are from the county zoning board." Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "Natalie, I'm sorry, but we need to pause filming for a bit. We have visitors who may not be friendly to our operation." Natalie followed her gaze to the approaching group and frowned. "The developer you mentioned, want me to stick around? Sometimes having witnesses helps keep things civil." "Please do," Rebecca replied, grateful for the support. Montgomery's face darkened when he spotted the film equipment and crew scattered around the property. "Ms. Matthews," he called as he approached, not bothering with pleasantries. "I was not informed that you were allowing commercial filming on this property. The current agricultural zoning does not permit such activities without special permits." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "We have the permits, Mr. Montgomery, filed and approved last week." This was true. Michael had insisted on handling all the legal requirements for the film shoot with meticulous attention to detail, anticipating exactly this kind of challenge. Montgomery's attorney stepped forward. Nevertheless, there are other concerns. We've received complaints about increased traffic to and from the property, noise disturbances, and possible violations of animal welfare regulations. Complaints from whom? Rebecca asked, though she could guess the answer. Concerned citizens, the woman replied smoothly. The county takes such matters seriously. Natalie stepped forward, extending her hand with professional courtesy. Natalie Chen, Horizon Films. I can assure you that our production adheres to the strictest animal welfare standards, far exceeding minimum requirements. In fact, we chose Silver Meadow specifically because of Ms. Matthews' exemplary care protocols. The two men from the zoning board exchanged glances, clearly not expecting to encounter a Hollywood producer in what they'd probably anticipated would be a straightforward intimidation visit. Our traffic impact is minimal, Rebecca added. 3 vehicles, arriving and departing during standard business hours. As for noise, we're using natural light whenever possible and minimal equipment. The horses' routines haven't been disrupted at all. Montgomery's expression grew increasingly frustrated as his expected leverage points were systematically dismantled. This doesn't change the fundamental issue, Ms. Matthews. This property is not zoned for the kind of sanctuary operation you're running. It's zoned for traditional agricultural use. Actually, James interjected, stepping forward with a folder he retrieved from his truck. We've been working with the Historical Preservation Society. They've completed their assessment of the original barn structure. He handed copies to the zoning board representatives. As you can see, they've confirmed its historical significance, which makes it eligible for protective designation and would allow for educational and preservation activities as permitted uses. Rebecca struggled to hide her surprise. James hadn't mentioned that the historical assessment had been completed. She shot him a grateful look as Montgomery snatched a copy of the report, his face darkening as he scanned its contents. This is a delaying tactic, nothing more, he snapped. Historical designation or not, the financial realities haven't changed. You can't sustain this operation indefinitely, Ms. Matthews. As if on cue, a van pulled up the driveway bearing the logo of a local news station. Helena Cortez emerged, followed by a camera operator. Perfect timing, Helena called. We're doing a follow-up piece on Silver Meadow's transformation. The response to our earlier articles has been overwhelming. She turned to the zoning board representatives. I'd love to get your perspective on the county's support for innovative agricultural operations like this one. Viewers are very interested in how local government nurtures small businesses. The men straightened, suddenly aware they were about to be on camera representing the county. Their demeanor shifted visibly from Montgomery's allies to neutral public servants concerned with being portrayed positively to constituents. We're always supportive of compliant agricultural operations, one of them said carefully. The county has a strong interest in preserving our rural heritage while ensuring all activities meet required standards. Montgomery, recognizing the shifting dynamics, signaled to his attorney. We'll continue this discussion another time, Ms. Matthews. But make no mistake, this issue is far from resolved. As the unwelcome visitors departed, Rebecca turned to James in amazement. The historical designation came through? Why didn't you tell me? James grinned. Got the call this morning. Wanted to keep it as a surprise, or as ammunition if needed. Turns out it was needed. And the news crew? Rebecca asked Elena, who was smiling broadly. Legitimate follow-up story, Elena assured her. But I may have mentioned to my editor that Montgomery was making another push today. Good timing is both luck and planning. Rebecca felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. A few months ago, she had been alone in a sterile apartment, connected to no one, fighting battles only for corporate clients who barely acknowledged her existence. Now she stood surrounded by allies who had appeared at precisely the right moment, each contributing their unique strengths to protect something that mattered. I don't know how to thank you all, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Natalie stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. You know, there's something powerful happening here that goes beyond our original film concept. The community rallying around this sanctuary, the developer's pressure, your personal journey. It's a story that needs to be told in its own right. What are you suggesting? Rebecca asked. A documentary, running parallel to our feature film production, the real-life drama unfolding at Silver Meadow Farm. With your permission, of course. Rebecca hesitated, uncomfortable with becoming the focus of attention rather than the horses she cared for. I don't know. It would significantly increase the location fees, Natalie added pragmatically. And more importantly, it would bring national attention to your mission here and to the pressure being applied by Montgomery Development. James nodded slowly. Nothing protects like publicity. Montgomery might push behind the scenes, but he won't want to be cast as the villain destroying a beloved horse sanctuary in front of a national audience. As Rebecca considered the proposal, Lazarus appeared at the paddock fence, watching the gathering with curious eyes. How far he had come from the skeletal, barely alive creature they had rescued. His journey of healing had only been possible because people had refused to give up on him, had fought for his right to exist even when it wasn't convenient or profitable. Didn't Silver Meadow deserve the same fierce protection? All right, Rebecca decided. Let's do it. Not for me, but for them. She gestured toward Lazarus and the other horses grazing peacefully, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to losing their sanctuary. For them, Natalie agreed with a smile. Their stories deserve to be told. 1 year later, Silver Meadow Farm was unrecognizable, not because it had been transformed into a development project, but because it had blossomed into something far beyond what Rebecca had initially imagined. The documentary, titled Second Chances, had premiered at a regional film festival to critical acclaim and was now streaming on a major platform, bringing Silver Meadow's story to audiences worldwide. The weather-beaten barn now stood proudly restored, its historical significance officially recognized with a plaque by the entrance. The paddocks had been expanded, the fencing replaced, and a covered arena added for year-round therapeutic riding programs. Most importantly, the number of rescue horses had grown from 7 to 12, each with their own story of abandonment and recovery. Rebecca stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching as Martha supervised a therapy session with a young boy named Ethan. Her aunt had returned to Silver Meadow 6 months ago, not as frail as Rebecca had feared, but not quite the robust woman she'd been before the stroke. Still, Martha had found her place in this new iteration of her sanctuary, primarily working with the children who came for therapeutic riding. "Look, Ms. Rebecca," Ethan called, waving excitedly. "I'm riding Lazarus all by myself." Rebecca smiled and waved back. Lazarus, now fully recovered and perhaps the most gentle soul in the stable, walked with careful steps, seeming to understand the precious cargo he carried. The once skeletal horse had transformed into a gleaming, muscular emblem of resilience and had become something of a celebrity after the documentary's release. Children especially connected with his story of survival against overwhelming odds. "He's doing wonderfully," Martha said when the session ended and Ethan had been collected by his mother. "Both of them are." Rebecca helped her aunt up the porch steps, noticing with relief that Martha needed less assistance each week. "Lazarus seems to have found his calling. He's so patient with the children. Some horses are born to race, some to work. Others are born to heal," Martha observed, lowering herself into one of the rocking chairs that lined the porch. "Rather like people, wouldn't you say?" Rebecca nodded, understanding the parallel her aunt was drawing. A year ago, she had been racing through life with no clear purpose, accumulating achievements that brought little genuine satisfaction. Now, like Lazarus, she had found her true calling in creating a place of healing, not just for horses, but for humans who needed connection and restoration just as desperately. The sound of approaching vehicles drew their attention. A small convoy was making its way up the driveway, Natalie's production SUV, followed by several cars Rebecca didn't recognize. The investors, Martha guessed. Rebecca nodded, a flutter of nervousness stirring in her stomach. Supposedly, Natalie's been very mysterious about who they are. After the documentary's success, Natalie had approached Rebecca with a proposition. Investors interested in helping Silver Meadow expand its operations into a full-fledged nonprofit with satellite facilities in neighboring counties. The meeting today would determine whether that vision could become reality. "Whatever happens, we've already won," Martha reminded her, patting her hand. "Silver Meadow is safe, the horses are thriving, and Montgomery has finally admitted defeat." That much was true. The public backlash against Gabriel Montgomery's attempts to pressure the sanctuary had been swift and decisive. The documentary had captured several of his more heavy-handed tactics, and the resulting publicity had forced him to publicly withdraw his interest in the property. Alexander, to everyone's surprise, had resigned from his father's company shortly afterward, citing ethical differences in development philosophy. Rebecca watched as Natalie emerged from her vehicle, followed by 3 well-dressed individuals, 2 women and a man, who surveyed the property with evident interest. But it was the driver of the last car who caught Rebecca's attention, causing her to straighten in surprise. "Is that?" Martha began. "Alexander Montgomery," Rebecca confirmed, watching as he approached, looking both more relaxed and more purposeful than she remembered. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, rather than the designer attire she associated with him. Natalie led the group onto the porch, making introductions. "Rebecca, Martha, I'd like you to meet Elaine Winters, Thomas Jeffries, and Sophia Rosenthal, the investors I mentioned, and I believe you already know Alexander." "Former investors," Elaine corrected with a warm smile. "Now board members of the Silver Meadow Foundation, if you'll have us." Rebecca shook hands with each of them, her mind racing to process this unexpected development. "I don't understand. The foundation already exists." Alexander stepped forward. "After I left my father's company, I needed a new direction. Your work here inspired me. I reached out to Natalie, who connected me with others who shared the vision of expanding what you've created. We've spent the past few months establishing the legal framework for a nonprofit that would preserve Silver Meadow's mission in perpetuity. With you as the executive director, of course," Sophia added. "If you're willing, your expertise and passion are irreplaceable." Rebecca looked to Martha, who nodded encouragement, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "I think you should hear them out, Becky. This sounds like everything we've dreamed of." Over the next hour, as they toured the facility, the group outlined their vision. Silver Meadow would become the flagship location of a network of sanctuaries, each specializing in different aspects of equine rehabilitation and therapy. The foundation would provide stable funding, professional support, and resources that would ensure the work continued regardless of economic fluctuations or external pressures. "Why?" Rebecca finally asked as they stood by Apollo's paddock, the question that had been burning in her mind throughout the presentation. Why invest in this particular cause? Each investor had a personal answer. Elaine had lost a beloved horse to neglect before she had the resources to provide proper care. Thomas's autistic son had made breakthrough progress through equine therapy. Sophia believed in creating sanctuaries that preserved the connection between humans and animals in an increasingly disconnected world. But it was Alexander's answer that resonated most deeply. "Because Silver Meadow represents the road not taken," he said simply. "A choice to preserve rather than destroy, to heal rather than exploit. My father built his legacy on transforming landscapes to suit human desires. I'd like to build mine on honoring what already exists and helping it thrive. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the paddocks, the visitors departed with promises to return soon for a formal signing of the foundation documents. Rebecca and Martha remained on the porch, processing the day's unexpected developments. "Are you going to accept?" Martha asked gently. Rebecca looked out over the property, at Lazarus and Apollo grazing side by side, at the children's artwork decorating the therapy center, at the barn that had stood for over a century and would now stand for generations more. "Yes," she said, the word carrying the weight of both decision and destiny. "This is where I belong." Martha squeezed her hand. "You know, when you first arrived to take over the farm, I worried I was asking too much of you, that you might resent giving up your career, your life in the city." Rebecca shook her head, smiling at the memory of who she had been, the woman in designer clothes who had driven up this same driveway a year ago, full of doubt and disconnect. "I didn't give up a life, Martha. I found one." As if acknowledging her words, Apollo lifted his head and nickered softly in their direction. Beside him, Lazarus did the same, the two horses silhouetted against the golden evening light, one who had taught her to trust again, one who had taught her the power of second chances. In the gathering dusk, Rebecca felt a sense of completion unlike anything she had experienced in her years of corporate achievement. The abandoned horses had been rescued, yes, but in saving them, she had also rescued something essential in herself: the capacity to care deeply, to fight fearlessly for what mattered, to build a life of genuine purpose. Some might say she had left everything behind. Rebecca knew the truth was exactly the opposite. She had found everything that truly mattered.